Hey, North Dakota, Rob Port here.
And I'm Chad Oban. We're back for another live recording of Plain Talk on Wednesday, April 23rd at Peacock Alley in beautiful downtown Bismarck.
We'll be interviewing special guests, reacting to the latest headlines, and answering questions from the audience.
Admission is free, so plan to arrive early, grab a great spot. We'll kick things off around 5:30.
That's Wednesday, April 23rd at Peacock Alley in Bismarck, starting at 5:30 p.m.
We'll see you there.
North Dakotans for Public Schools is dedicated to protecting and strengthening public education in North Dakota. United by the belief that public schools are the cornerstone of our communities, North Dakotans for Public Schools fights against harmful policies like voucher schemes that divert resources away from public schools. By bringing together educators, parents, school boards, and citizens, North Dakotans for Public Schools amplifies the voices of those who understand the critical role public schools play in shaping the future of North Dakota's children and communities. Learn more and get involved at ndforpublicschools.com.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk. We're at that point in the legislative session where everything gets super weird. If you follow this stuff closely, it's hard. It gets really hard to track this stuff. The first part of the session, it's pretty easy because each chamber has their own bills, and it's a pretty straightforward process. The bills go to committee, they get hearings, they get a recommendation, they go to the floor, they get a vote. But then they go to the Senate side, and things start getting weird. They get amended, and the bills that are amended, they've got to go back to the other chamber. We get conference committees. It becomes very fluid. Things start moving very fast, and it's difficult to track things. Yesterday was a pretty big day. We had two very big votes, actually two big debates happening simultaneously. One in the House over what has been a at times very heated debate over Attorney General Drew Wrigley's truth in sentencing legislation. That ended up ultimately failing in the House after the issue was divided, and there was a long debate over amendments and everything. Ultimately went down. I think there was an 11-vote gap between the yeses and nos on that one. Meanwhile, while that was going on over on the Senate side, House bill, and I always get the bill number wrong. It's 1176, Chad? You got to correct me.
Yeah, I think it's 1176, and then Lausers is 1168.
Yeah, that's the problem. Is I keep writing 1167 when I'm trying to talk about Representative Nathy's bill. That represents the Armstrong plan for property taxes. The amendments that were put on that bill were approved by the Senate yesterday, and those are the amendments that cut it down. I wrote something like, I kind of feel like the Senate has maybe lost the plot on property taxes because I don't know. The voters want like substantial targeted relief. I feel like that's what the Nathy Armstrong bill was delivering, and then the Senate did a whole bunch of watering it down. And I think everybody's wondering why. What was the point of that? Anyway, here to talk with us about all of this, Representative Matt Ruby. He's a Republican. He's from Minot. Matt, how are you?
I'm good. How are you guys doing?
Good. Pretty good. Let's talk about that truth in sentencing debate yesterday, because that's a tough one. Because on one hand, I think the Attorney General is wrong in a lot of the things he's been saying. I think he describes a crime wave in North Dakota, but when I look at the Group A crime rates, Group A is the nomenclature used by Wrigley's office, by the Attorney General's office, to describe the most serious types of crimes. That crime rate is flat, going back nearly a decade. Group B crimes, which are less serious crimes like DUI, trespassing, whatnot, that's actually down. Meanwhile, incarceration rates are up. The average amount of days that prisoners are spending in DOCR facilities is up. A lot of the things he's saying just aren't true. But on the flip side, we all want our communities to be safer. And none of us want crime. And when you hear about a 40% recidivism rate, that sure ain't good. Although I would point out that the national recidivism rate is 66% of people who spend time in state prisons get arrested again within 3 years of being let out. So our 40% rate maybe doesn't, while it's maybe not great, doesn't look so bad compared to national numbers. But Matt, you sat through that debate. What were your reactions?
First of all, I was a little surprised that it didn't pass. I actually thought it was going to in some form, but yeah, there is been kind of a movement that we've had over my 5 sessions about getting rid of mandatory minimums and things like that, really trying to find alternatives to incarceration in certain situations. So when we're talking about these levels of crime, when I think the best way I had explained when I was trying to figure out where I was going to fall on this is you've got police and deputies that are they're arresting somebody, they're nailing the paperwork. It's going to a court. It's an elected judge that is putting them away and giving the sentence, and then you've got an appointed parole board that is lessening these sentences. And I think that really is what it comes down to. Is you get, if they're nailing it, the crime was there and it was proven, then I think when people see that whatever comes out in the paper for sentencing, that they're expected that they're going to serve most of that time. So I'm not going to say I know every crime that would have been affected by this, but truthfully, a halfway house isn't the same thing as a prison. And when some of these people are supposed to be in prison and they're getting time counted in a halfway house or these work release programs, I just don't know if that's what the people are expecting when that happens. So now, obviously, when you get into talking about the difference between a drug dealer and a drug user and stuff like that, that's where I think I don't remember if it was Representative Vetter or something like that had kind of explained where we muddied the water there. We kind of lump them together, and that's one that I think when we go forward, or we talked earlier before we started recording about what do we go from here. I think we got to start looking at some of the issues that were brought up on the floor and attacking those in individual situations rather than a full-on truth sentencing.
Representative Ruby, I assume based on that answer, I didn't look how you voted. Did you vote for the bill yesterday?
I did, yep.
So I think this whole sort of debate got lost in emotion a lot of the time. I think there was a lot of folks talking past each other and look, either you're tough on crime or you want to open all the prisons, right? I mean, sort of that simplistic approach. So you're somebody who's taken in both sides. I don't think you were on any of the committees that dealt with this. Do you feel like there was the quality of data, the quality of debate, the quality of real conversations to find a solution? Because I think Rob's right. We all want safe streets. We all don't want to be taxed outrageous rates to lock people up. There has to be some sort of middle ground. Do you think we accomplished what we should have accomplished here? I mean, did the legislators do... I understand these are complicated things, but you know what I'm trying to say? Mm-hmm. Can't we get to a table and have a conversation, figure this out?
I think so. You got a lot of our buzzwords out there, the back the blue and tough on crime. And there was a lot of that stuff that, I don't know if it really has the effect that it once did because it gets thrown out so often. But like I said, there were some legitimate concerns with the bill that were pointed out. And there were some things that could have gotten covered by that bill that didn't get added in. So, it's at this point in session, nothing's ever dead until we're signed and die. But I don't know if anything is going to be added in anywhere going forward this session, but I mean we have to take a look at some of this stuff, I think. But there's good arguments about just the sheer cost and the capacity in our prisons that need to be taken into account. But maybe then that entices people to look at some of these lower level crimes and alternatives there rather than some of these more serious ones. But
yeah, and it's hard because on one hand, I understand like the public sentiment that somebody who commits a serious crime and hurts somebody, you really want to feel like they're punished. On the other hand, we're saying, well, serving in a sentence in a transition house doesn't meet that expectation. Okay. But most of these people, even people who commit serious crimes, get out again. And if they're not in the transition center and they're not on a work program, or we're not doing things that aren't really possible if they're in the state pen in a cell, we're kind of moving them to facilities where it becomes possible to do work stuff. It becomes possible to do education and training. Then we release people out who've had none of that, who've just sat in a cell for 8 years. And what's the likelihood that they're going to find success on the outside and not reoffends? And so it's a tough issue. The thing that would really disappointed me is there were studies in some of those amendments and they got defeated. And I really wanted the studies to pass, because I think studies get used all the time as a political ploy sometimes to sort of, oh, we'll just study it. And then it doesn't really get studied and the bill gets killed. It's a tactic. But I think this one was ripe for a good faith study to get a lot of people around the table. Because again, when I hear the Attorney General's office is saying one thing, the DOCR is saying one thing, even prosecutors are saying one thing, defense attorneys are saying one thing, I feel like we could get a lot of those people around the table, the lawyers, the prosecutors, defense attorneys, the cops, the judiciary, and just like, okay, let's establish some facts. Let's establish a table of facts that we can all work for, and then have, because I feel like that was missing. We didn't have this debate was not underpinned by a shared group of facts. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And truthfully, I don't think I can think of too many bills or studies that have came out of the judiciary side. So in the interim, that would have been a perfect one to really give a lot of focus onto. And maybe one side isn't as right as they thought they were, but I mean, you only find that out through conversation and digging into it. And so, yeah, there's a missed opportunity there. I think that's one of those, it's one thing to revive a bill completely in a appropriation somewhere, but to put a study in, I don't think that's anybody's going to balk at that. And I think that's a good way forward, hopefully.
Maybe somebody could put one like on the DOCR budget or something. That'd be makes sense, right?
Yeah.
For that.
So,
sorry, go ahead.
Representative Ruby, I'm glad you're on today, because you're sort of unique in the legislature in the fact that you have school-age children, right? There's not a lot of people who are there. Last week was all about cell phone bans, bell-to-bell cell phone bans. They're working their way through the committees. I think they got kicked out of both education committees. They're now coming to the floor. So you're a dad. You've got kids, I think, for a pretty wide range of ages. How do you feel about this thing as a parent, as a lawmaker, as a conservative? What do you think?
Yeah, so I actually kind of lost the fight with my wife about when my daughter got her cell phone. She just turned 13 and she's had it for a few years now. But all my arguments that were being said are,
which side of the fight were you on? First of all,
I was not didn't want her to have a phone that early. But this beginning of the school year, her school actually came out with the same policy, and they did a study over the summer and presented all the facts to the parents. And there were some parents that were against it, and there's a lot of kids that were against it. But suddenly, my wife was seeing. I don't have the degree that her colleagues have that justified it, I guess. And but same arguments, and so my daughter has that. They have when she goes to school, she puts her phone in a mesh bag. There's a magnetic bag or something like that, and there's an unlock as you walk out the door. Or there's an unlock in the principal's office, so if they need it for something, but it stays in the locker, and it can be used in case of emergency, but or if the parent calls or something like that, there's criteria when it can be done. I don't really have a benchmark to determine, other than I think, she's a little more focused. I mean, she's always been thankfully she takes after my wife and is really, really good in school, but so I can't say her grades have improved or anything like that. She's been able to take on more extracurricular activities and still maintain her grades, but I don't know if I have an issue with it. There's certain instances where I think it benefits. It is nice to have access to your kids. The strange thing is that we're getting a fair amount of emails from school boards and administrators that want this, And they want to essentially have the state's backing. Like they might want to do it. They're getting some pushback, and if the state does it, then they're going to do that. So I don't know. I haven't read the bill, but I had heard that there was it got a little over reaching, and they were trying to get it back to the bell to bell, but I haven't. I couldn't even talk to them on the details because I haven't read it yet.
But the concept of the state doing the ban, you're comfortable with that if it's done in a way that works for the districts.
Yeah, I mean it.
Well, what do you?
Like
What
I
do you
said,
think? You're obviously hesitant. What's holding you back?
well, you're always going to have that local control, and it's just one of those times where they're trying to almost punt to us. But then there's also times where we're fighting tooth and neck when we're trying to do something and they're arguing local control. So that's always my little bit of hesitation is that we're taking something over here. But I don't disagree with the concept. There's been plenty of things that I've liked the concept. I just didn't like the heavy-handedness from the state.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I think at this point I'd probably support it just because I have gotten a lot of emails from administrators and school board members and a fair amount of parents too. But far less have emailed me to vote against it. So
when I read the bill, it's only public, because I'm assuming Matt and I live in the same community, and I know Minot Public Schools doesn't have that policy. So I'm assuming your kids go to private school.
Yeah, they switched over this year because my wife teaches at Ryan. Yep.
Yeah. So I think the legislation only applies to public schools.
Mm-hmm.
So the private schools would.
The House amended their version to include privates as well. The Senate version does not. Okay. I would suspect it will end up including everybody just because it's an easy thing to.
I have some of my hesitancy, and it's amazing how the local control argument always it's such a useless argument.
We're all hypocrites when it comes to local control.
Somebody makes a local control. It's just rote, and they like it, and everyone wants the state to be the heavy when it's something they don't want to do. But when it's something they do want to control, they want the state to stay out. So when I hear the local control argument, I wad it up and throw it in the garbage. Almost me.
But it's one that gets thrown at us a lot. So it's one that we have to keep in the back of our head a little bit. I mean, I'm not worried about I can't get reelected, and I've really never cared about getting reelected. I kind of present my views, and if I no longer represent the views of my district, then I'll get unelected. But that's some people are real sticklers. It's just a purist mentality on it. And but actually I won't say that. There's nobody that has ever been on that side every time. There's always one issue that they're like, yeah, you know what, maybe this is where we should stick the state's nose into it.
That's my approach to it. I don't. Local control is not an ideology. It makes sense in some instances, and it doesn't in others. And there's a constant balancing act between what's appropriate to let local governing entities control and what's appropriate to have the state step in. I will say I completely understand the administrators who want the legislature to play the bad cop. I got to imagine that one of the worst things about being an educator is probably dealing with parents, because they are a pain in the rear end.
You don't like my policy, call the governor's office. He's the one that signed the bill.
Armstrong. I completely get it. And to a degree, I even support it. I think, and as we had a whole debate about this with a very smart gentleman from Anxious Generation who made a lot of good arguments. I'm worried the current bills go too far. I don't know about bell to bell. I think maybe if we just really focus on classroom time, that's what I would like to see, but it's interesting. Tell us a little bit about property taxes. Now, the House passed a bill, had a $1,450 credit, no cap on that credit, and the expectation is the credit would grow over time, and eventually, down the road as legacy fund earnings grow, might eventually completely cancel out most people's property tax bills. The Senate came down and basically they lowered the credit to $1,250, and they put in place a cap where your credit can't be any more than 75% of your property tax bill. What do you think of that, Matt? Do you think that was the right approach, or how is that going to play out?
I think we are for certain going to see another property tax measure if that's the version that we kick out. I don't think that measure failing by that amount was because people love paying property taxes. So if we don't have a stepped plan where eventually we get to the point where it's zeroed out and they're as best as possible, everybody's held harmless, all the subdivisions. We're gonna be right back in this position, fighting against hope. I mean, truthfully, I was saying we should pass that measure 4 so we had something to entice us into it, and then I realized it was going in the Constitution. Then it was an automatic no for me. And I think if we give them peanuts, we're going to see that kind of half-baked plan on how to do this, and truthfully, it'll probably end up in the Constitution again. That's the wrong spot for it.
Matt, what do you say to the people who say all property tax owners should have skin in the game? I mean, that is sort of one of the things you hear from over at the Senate. Wow, people need to pay for the services they're provided. They need to understand that. You're saying we got to get to zero. What would you say to the folks over in the Senate that are saying, nah, they have to pay at least 25% of their property taxes?
I don't know. I guess I hadn't heard that as the rally cry, but
But your goal is to get to zero. I mean, you think that is the message that the legislature should have coming out of this, is there needs to be a plan to get to zero, or a course to get to zero.
Yeah, I think so. Legacy funded, when it was put into place, if you talk to the people that were here when that was put in, it was supposed to be a kind of a rainy day fund. Well, that's certainly not. I mean, it can get used that way, but Burgum always talked about leaving the legacy, where you get your name from. And I don't know if there's a better legacy than actually owning your home. I fully understand we pay taxes for services that we hope to never use. You think of EMS stuff and things like that, but I mean, there's so many of those that we're not even probably paying enough for in the first place. So yeah, I think it makes it an easier sell if we ever need to look at increases to some of these services where we can. It's an easier sell to bring to the state and say, let's be looking at increasing that portion. And I'm thinking, in my mind, I'm thinking emergency services just because I've been dealing with ambulance services all session. So, but as far as you can, there's people now that have more in property tax payments than they ever had for mortgage of their house, and that's just crazy to me.
It really is. And we should be clear too, by using legacy funds, we're using the NATHE bill. Armstrong plan uses a carve out from legacy fund earnings that's already carved out. I mean, it's funds that were flowing into the SIF fund, and we're going to basically redirect those funds to property tax relief. And then obviously as the legacy fund gets bigger, its earnings get bigger, that percentage gets bigger. So we're using it's a percentage of the legacy fund's earnings. My point is, we'd still be able to use the legacy fund for lots of other things. It's not like we're going to decide this is what it's for. We're going to use something that's already being carved out, hopefully, if we get there. Do you think there's any appetite in the House to just put back what the House had in that Senate bill? Because I think there is an imperative that the legislature pass something. So maybe you could put the Senate on the House. I was talking to some of your House colleagues who were kind of a little down in the mouth saying, yeah, but the Senate's got the bill now, so they're in the driver's seat. What can we do? Maybe, I don't know, maybe could you put the Senate back in the hot seat and just restore the House's version?
I think there's other bills that they're really hoping that gets through that will be used as leverage. But I don't know which ones. I don't know what we're sitting on in appropriations right now. They've been inundated with a lot of different bills from the policy committees, but I'm sure there's something. This is one of the things that I really trust Mike LaFleur on, is he's kind of got a game plan for a lot of this stuff, and I think he's ready to go to bat.
What do you? I'm sorry, Chad. Go ahead.
No. One other thing that was discussed this week was putting something on the ballot to adjust the term limits measure. This is kind of a fun interview for me, Matt, because I didn't look how you voted on any of these things. It's not clear, so it's sort of fun. So, I mean, you have one side who's basically saying the legislature is trying to undo the term limits. You have the other side saying, listen, this just adjusts it slightly. What do you think about this whole conversation? And do you think that the public knew what they were voting on in 2022 when they voted for term limits?
So I'll answer that last one. I got to work the day after the election, and I had so many people tell me, yeah, I voted for that term limit in Congress. And the reason that they think that is when you listen to the ads on the radio and they talk about it's time to take back this country, nobody's thinking North Dakota at that point. Also, the state fair, there were at least two of the entrances, they had tents set up, and they had term limiting Congress. I have photos of it that I took.
I published photos of it in the newspaper.
Yeah. So I know for a fact that there is a good number. I don't have any way to quantify it, but everybody here, other than the people that are sitting in a kind of their echo chamber, especially if they were involved with it, are saying, oh no, they knew exactly what everybody outside of those ones are saying. I know somebody that thinks that they term limited Congress. So like I said, I don't know if it's enough to defeat that measure or not, but as far as what we passed on the floor, we still held true to it's 16 years. Like, we didn't change that. We just said you don't have to jump to the Senate I wouldn't have to jump to the Senate after 2 terms. So there's a lot of people that don't like term limits in general that voted for that, just because that's at least in line with what those that voted for it, or that really understood it, wanted. And I've heard from a few different people on that sponsoring committee that wanted 12 years, and so they and in each chamber, and so even their sponsorship committee wasn't lockstep on 8 and 8. So I don't have an issue with it going to the ballot. I know their argument is that we have that provision on in the Constitution of that the legislature can't put anything on the ballot in this realm. And I kind of had a back and forth at one of my district meetings about that. Part of the reason that we put it in there was to challenge that and see if that is held true. And the argument is that, well, it's whatever passes last. Well, that's true for bills, because eventually we can reconcile laws in other bills, or it gets cleaned up in the drafting aspect of it. But we don't have that ability in the Constitution, so it's not going to ever reconcile in that way. So we are going to. I think that is going to be a challenge. Truthfully, I kind of hope somebody sues over that, and that gets worked out, if that is a provision that works, and if that actually has any merit.
I think we need the courts to weigh in, because if you think about it, if that's what we're talking about, is there's a portion of the term limits measure that passed, that's in the Constitution now, that says the legislature's not allowed to amend that part of the Constitution. And so that's what a lot of people are saying. Well, the people told them to keep their hands off, and they're not keeping their hands off. I think that was a stupid thing for them to put in their measure, because it's ripe for legal challenge. And part of the problem is I think the courts will strike it down. And part of the reason why is, if you think about it, if that's legal, why wouldn't every ballot measure add that language?
Right.
And if we could do it for the Constitution, why can't we do it for the statute? That's like this legislature passing a sentencing bill and including in there that future sentences aren't allowed, or future legislatures aren't allowed to amend it. If that's sort of legislating, that is fundamentally, that is anti-democratic. That is not how our system works. Our laws can change all the time. That's how the system was designed. But I'm worried, like, if that's allowed to stand, every ballot measure is going to have that language. And then we're going to get to a point where every policy question has to be settled at the ballot, because we've written into the law that the legislature can't do all of these things. I think that's silly. Also, the other thing is, by the way, I would remind, the legislature was also elected by the people. This whole, like, well, the people spoke. Well, they also spoke when they elected all these people to Bismarck. So, this is democracy. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. With our last 5 minutes, I want to turn back the clock to an issue, a while back. We didn't get a chance to talk to you contemporaneous to it, but HCR 3013, same-sex marriage resolution. I want to commend you and give you a shout out, and not just because you flipped necessarily because you flipped from to my side of the issue. You ultimately agreed with me. I guess that might make me biased towards it, but I thought it took a lot of character to admit that you were wrong about something, and then to do it more than words. Like, you showed up when that resolution came before the Senate committee. You showed up and you testified against it. So I guess I just wanted to. That's so rare in politics that somebody would do that and not just have it be words. So congratulations, man. I mean, I wish it happened more. I don't. We treat changing your mind like it's some grievous sin in politics sometimes, and it's not. I think it can be a good thing.
I think you're absolutely right. It's very unfortunate that isn't a more common thing. Now, truthfully, for some of the reason that I was really upset with myself is I knew where I stood on that issue, and I still got one little minute little thought about I'm even blanking on it.
States' rights or
a civil union license rather than a marriage license, and I know that it didn't work. I thought about it when I first got in. I knew it didn't work, and I got hung up on that. And like I said, I knew immediately that I was wrong, and that I'd screwed up on that, and I needed to do something. But I appreciate the thank you, but I really wish it hadn't been necessary in the first place. I wish I would have just thought that through and made sure. But I had no problem. I don't know if you even or heard what I had said in that, but I have so many friends that I've celebrated at their weddings, and that's truly what I have no problem going out and letting my views out there on that one. I know that one kind of bucks the party line a little bit, but I've done that on a few things, and it's like I said, if I'm off my my district's beliefs a little bit, then they'll replace me. But no, I just, that one, I don't know if I've ever had a vote that I just felt so sick after casting, and that one was a tough one for me. And I reached out to a lot of my friends and apologized to them before I even got a chance to testify. But I should have been better in that moment and not even needed it.
Yeah, and I want to agree with Rob. I mean, I think not only changing your position, but doing it public, not changing your position, changing your vote. That's a different thing. But then showing up. And I get a kick out of some of my friends on my side of the aisle who are saying, oh, they're just changing their position for political reasons because it's easy for them. I was like, I don't think being a Republican in Minot, being pro same-sex marriage is necessarily the easy political position to take. So this was not the easy political thing for you to do, and so kudos for that. My last question for you is, it's April. Conference committees are starting. When are y'all going to get done, and how many days are you going to leave?
I think our sign and die is 20. I don't know, the 26th or something like that. Now we've had that party and still went in a couple of days later. I'm hoping as we have as much time as possible. I think we're going to try to save at least a week, but with all the things that are happening with federal funding, especially in the realm of Medicaid expansion, we have to save something, because we're going to, realistically, if any change is made to that, we're going to have to come back. So I don't know. I've got a pregnant wife and 4 kids at home that I'd be super excited to see sooner than later.
I think there's a lot of people that feel that way. Representative Ruby, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you guys having me on.
Thank you.
North Dakotans for Public Schools is dedicated to protecting and strengthening public education in North Dakota. United by the belief that public schools are the cornerstone of our communities, North Dakotans for Public Schools fights against harmful policies like voucher schemes that divert resources away from public schools. By bringing together educators, parents, school boards, and citizens, North Dakotans for Public Schools amplifies the voices of those who understand the critical role public schools play in shaping the future of North Dakota's children and communities. Learn more and get involved at ndforpublicschools.com.
Welcome back. Just finished our interview with State Representative Matt Ruby. And one thing that he mentioned towards the end of the interview, and we didn't have time to dig into it with Representative Ruby, but the legislature is putting some effort into, particularly it sounds like in the Health and Human Services budget, which makes sense because there's a ton of federal money, across all sorts of different programs and what have you in that budget. But getting prepared because we're not real sure what federal funding is going to look like coming out of the Trump administration, which is a great segue into our next guest, Senator John Hoeven, who's out in Washington, D.C. And Senator Hoeven, I know that, you're a Trump supporter, and I have a feeling you're going to tell us that you support a lot of what the administration's doing. But I got to tell you, we had some folks on from domestic violence groups earlier in the week. They're feeling very uncertain. A lot of the vital services that they provide, they're feeling uncertain. We're hearing now from lawmakers saying, they're uncertain. What can you tell North Dakotans with certainty, or with any degree of certainty, about what's going to be happening with federal funding for our state?
Well, first off, as you know, the funding for the current fiscal year, it just recently approved. So really, I guess the changes that they might see really wouldn't start until the next fiscal year. That starts October 1 of this year and runs through into 2026. Really, the effort, I've met with Doge a number of times and with Elon Musk and talked at length about these issues. And I think what gets lost in this whole discussion is the focus is on waste, fraud, and abuse. The focus is on making sure that people are showing up for work and doing their job. It's also, though, on enhancing productivity and trying to improve, in essence, customer service to the American people. So, again, the effort is to really make the whole effort more productive, more cost-effective, and so forth, but still provide the services and support that the government provides and should provide, but do it in an accountable, cost-effective way that not only gets the job done, but is accountable to the American taxpayer.
Senator Hoeven, Chad Oben here. Thanks for being on. I want to dive a little bit deeper into that because I think everything you just said, everybody in America would agree with, right? The idea of trying to be more efficient, making sure we're using our taxpayer dollars properly. The problem that many folks are seeing with Doge, it seems like there's a cut first, figure out what it means later sort of approach to a lot of these things. I mean, it's not only the sexual and domestic assault groups that we've heard from. The North Dakota Humanities Council just had their funding pulled. There's public health groups that had their funding pulled immediately. There were grants for COVID-related things, and that funding was cut immediately. I think having a conversation about if those COVID-related grants should go away, but they should go away after the conclusion of the grant that's been awarded. So can you just talk a little bit about process? Because I think the idea of making sure that we're getting everything for tax dollars is a good one, but I'm not sure this approach of just causing chaos with the idea that hopefully we'll get to a good place soon is the right way to go.
Yeah, Chad, I get it. And I think the key word that in that whole your comment there in question is that process. And people have to understand that is a process. So sure, Doge identifies various cost savings, waste, fraud, and abuse, and all those kind of things. But President Trump's made it very clear that it is up to the cabinet secretaries ultimately whether those things go forward, don't go forward, or how they're implemented and so forth. So it is a process. It's not just those gets to say, okay, this is how it's going to be. They make those recommendations. Then, like I say, it's ultimately up to the cabinet secretaries. Now, what I've tried to do, along with other members of Congress, is not only wade in with those, but also the White House, as well as the agencies, and say, okay, this needs to be a process where you take these recommendations. You get input from folks directly, but you also get input from members of Congress, both the House and the Senate, and so that we go through and determine, okay, which of these need to be implemented are truly good, cost-effective savings, finding waste, fraud, and abuse where it exists, but finding better ways to do things. But then where should somebody not be, rift or, if you have voluntary retirements where we need somebody in that job. And so that is the process. Now, of course, there's always no matter how you do it, not everything gets done right. No question about it. Even Elon Musk himself said it, like I said, and I've been in multiple meetings with him. He said they will make mistakes. They will get things wrong. And then those things have to get addressed, and they want to figure out ways to do it. So I've been, spent time not only talking to the administration and the White House and their officials, their liaison to Congress, but also with the cabinet agencies, secretaries themselves, whether it's Doug Burgum or Brooke Rollins or Chris Wright or anyone else. I had a conversation yesterday with Chris Wright where somebody thought had read or heard, or I don't know how they got the information, but said, oh, well, we had this huge grant pulled in the energy world. I called Chris Wright directly, said, hey, what's going on? He said, no way. He's getting calls all the time about stuff being, terminated or whatever. That wasn't. So don't get me wrong. There are instances, I get it, and that where somebody maybe had something held up or canceled or whatever. And in some cases, yeah, that's going to be the case. But in a lot of these cases, once we go to work on them, we can get them squared away. And this is going to take some time. It's going to be a process. Now, anytime a new administration comes in, you get a certain amount of that. And, depending on if it's a Democrat or a Republican administration, it creates different issues. But there's always a transition, and obviously we're going through that.
One thing that we heard from Seth O'Neill, he's the executive director of the North Dakota Domestic and Sexual Violence Coalition. A quote that he made was that at this point, they don't even know who to call because, as you said, a lot of the funding has already been approved, but there's a lot of people being fired. He was talking about, some specific departments within the Centers for Disease Control that are related, to their issue area where they don't even know who works there anymore. And so even if they have questions about where their grants are, they don't even know who to call. Doesn't it speak in understanding there's some chaos, there's a process and everything else. Are we sure that's the right process to be doing it that way where people just don't even know who to contact to get information?
Yeah, obviously that should not be the case. And we have to find ways to, fill those gaps as rapidly as we can. That's one of the challenges too with the whole confirmation process, Rob. Think about it. I mean, we have been going like tonight, we'll probably go all night and, in terms of voting. And remember, and then we'll continue, like the House was out this week, we'll continue because we'll probably do another 12 or more nomination confirmations this next week. So the process is cumbersome in terms of trying to get these people into these slots. And of course, we have the situation where our colleagues across the aisle, they're trying to hold up all these confirmations and drag them out. So I get you. I mean, we can't get them in there as fast as we'd like to. And so we're trying to do our part to do that. But yeah, there are gaps, and in this transition process, they're going to be, and it's going to take some time to sort it out, but we got to keep working at it and try to cover those bases as best we can, which is why I said, not only do we try to do it through our constituency services, but I have also worked with the White House and with individual agencies. And again, I talked to Doug Burgum about it. He'll express his frustration too, getting his folks in place fast enough to cover these gaps and these issues like you've identified.
Senator, just transitioning to tariffs really quick. I mean, historically, the Republican position has been opposed to tariffs, free trade, that sort of thing. Obviously, President Trump slapped on some big numbers onto a bunch of countries on, I suppose it was 2 days ago. Last I looked, the S&P is down about 8% in the last 2 days. There's a lot of people out here that are super nervous about this. How is this affecting their 401ks, but also how's it going to affect the prices of things moving forward? Do you support these tariffs? Is this something that you think is good for America, good for North Dakota?
Well, remember, Chad, the goal is to get reciprocity, which means actually trying to get these countries to come to the table and get rid of not only tariff, but also non-tariff trade barriers. For as long as I can remember, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, we've said, hey, we want free trade, but we want it to be fair trade. I'm guessing you can remember that television commercial where Senator Dorgan was driving a grain truck up to Canada, and he was talking about the Canadian Wheat Board and how, doggone it, they weren't doing things right and they were unfair to our farmers, and they're a monopoly. And he worked on that, and frankly, I worked on that as governor. We ultimately got a case in front of the WTO and won it against the Canadian Wheat Board. So this has been a bipartisan issue for a long time, and it is how do we actually get reciprocity? And I think we all share that goal. And look at China, for crying out loud. I mean, they not only manipulate their currency and have tariffs and non-tariff trade barriers, they infringe on our patents, our copyrights. They don't respect contracts. So, this is part of getting tough and with our friends as well as adversaries and saying, doggone it, we've got to have better trade terms. I mean, whether it's our farmers, ranchers, or anyone else, we feel we can compete given a fair shot, but we don't have a level playing field out there. So yeah, there's disruption, no question about it. And I think the president was pretty upfront about saying there's going to be, but it is about, you have to decide whether we're going to seriously fight back against these folks that, and again, it's our friends too. Look at the restrictions that the EU has. I mean, the idea that we can't send, meat products in there that we eat every day because somehow they're worried about whether they're healthy or not. I mean, come on. So that's the goal, that's the objective. But yeah, there's disruption, as we work to push back and hopefully get to a point where it's a level playing field and actually don't have these trade barriers, tariffs, and other trade barriers as well.
You talk about getting some of our friends on board. Sometimes it feels like the Trump administration is not treating some of our friends as friends. Canada, in particular, having served as governor and senator, I don't need to tell you how important North Dakota's relationship with Canada is for tourism, for trade. Most of our exports go to Canada. And when we hear things about calling Canada the 51st state, sort of belittling the country and everything else like that, do you think that's helpful ultimately to what we're trying to achieve here?
Well, he's a New Yorker, and he's got his own style. I think the objective is he wants to first, he definitely wanted help from Mexico.
Former South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem's not a New Yorker, and she's up there. I mean, she's mocking them. I mean, is it just a New York thing, or why? I mean, what is the point of doing that, of belittling our friends in Canada?
I think what he's after is he actually wants to renegotiate USMCA. He wanted more help on fentanyl, which is perfectly legitimate. And so I think those are the real, and he's got his own negotiating style, and obviously you're aware of it. But I think substantively what he's after is, in the case of Mexico, reinstating the third safe country and the Remain in Mexico protocols, which we need Mexico to work with us on that, or they don't work. And you can see how effectively that has happened. Also stopping the fentanyl sales, renegotiating USMCA. I think substantively that's what he's after.
So, Senator, what would you say to the farmers and ranchers and folks that are looking at their 401ks and that are really, really nervous? I think that's the one thing that I'm trying to sort of figure out. I mean, there's just a lot of nervous about the chaos and the uncertainty moving forward. Yeah. I mean, is your message to them that just wait, we'll land in a good spot here?
Well, look, again, we share the goal, and I know it's tough now, and I'm well aware of it. Chad, if you recall, when during President Trump's first term, he implemented tariffs on China. And they retaliated right away. And of course, they retaliated against our farmers and ranchers. And I worked with Sonny Perdue, who was Ag Secretary at that time. I chair Ag Approach, and I did at that time too. And we went to work and we used the CCC, the Commodity Credit Corporation, and put together a program called MFP, the Market Facilitation Program. And there were 2 rounds of it, but we provided assistance to help and support our farmers and ranchers through that stretch. And ultimately, where we ended up is the president was able to negotiate a $50 billion trade deal with China to purchase our ag products, and a $50 billion deal with China to purchase our manufacturing products. And then he went on to renegotiate NAFTA and got the USMCA. So, again, yeah, it's disruptive now, but hopefully the goal is going to be that we get better trade terms, certainly from China and other countries as well.
What is Congress's role in this? Because I listen, we talk as North Dakota Republic, we talk endlessly about past presidential administrations doing things through executive order. The Obama, whether it's the Obama administration, the Biden administration, energy regulations through executive order, our state sues them with some regularity. And there's an argument a lot of the times that, the executive branch is not supposed to make law. Congress is supposed to make law. And yet this presidential administration seems to be doing a lot of things through executive order that, frankly, Congress ought to do. Tariffs perhaps being one of them. What are your feelings? Understanding you're a Republican, Donald Trump's a Republican, you're a Trump supporter, but when you're in Congress, there's a certain, traditionally, there's a certain amount of I also represent this institution and its role, the role it has to play in our separation of powers and the federal government. So what's your role? Do you think the Trump administration is going too far with some of these executive orders?
Rob, you have a good understanding not only of politics, but also of history. You often comment on a lot of things that, go beyond just the political aspect, but, what happened historically and go through and do a lot of analysis on those kind of things. As far as President Trump's executive orders, how about a little perspective there? Let's take a step back to President Joe Biden's executive orders. Why don't you pull in a few energy folks and talk about whether Joe Biden went beyond congressional authority with his Article 2 prerogatives in the energy realm, or maybe just a minute now. Let me finish. We should talk about the border. How about all of the executive orders that Joe Biden issued on the border, and millions of people came into this country, including criminal organization members like Tren de Aragua and MS-13. Okay, and so I could go on for quite a while and give you a pretty long litany of how I think, in my opinion, that the Biden administration went beyond what they should in his executive orders. So now you want to roll that forward to Trump. Yeah, folks that don't agree with his agenda, with the agenda to get America back on track, which I think we need to undertake, and we're already seeing benefits from, for example, in border security. Look at the numbers. Somebody can say, well, that somehow went too far. So that's an argument you're going to get no matter what executive is in there. But ultimately, what I'll tell you is anything one president does through executive order, the next president can undo. So the reality is, to really effectuate lasting change, you need to pass legislation and get it in statute. That's an Article 1 prerogative, and that is why you're seeing so much work done right now. We haven't even touched on it yet, but it's really important what we're doing with budget reconciliation, because that once we pass this resolution, which we will tonight, that's going to produce a reconciliation bill that's going to set tax policy and a lot of other things in statute that then the next president can't just come in and change that through an EO. That's statutory. That has to be changed by law. So that's the difference. One is, goes past administration to the administration. The other can be undone by the very next president.
So I want to shift gears slightly. Recently, it came to light that many of the primary national security folks in the country were on an unsecured signal chat discussing bombing in Yemen, including J.D. Vance and Mike Walls and also Pete Hegseth. And they accidentally included a member of the media on those unsecured chats. It's very concerning to me that they're unsecured chats more so than the fact that they added in a reporter. Do you think people should have been fired for this? What do you think the ramifications for that kind of incompetence should be?
Yeah, it was a mistake. Shouldn't have happened, and shouldn't happen. And obviously can't happen again. And, there's a number of reviews going on. So we'll see ultimately, what the resolution is. And that includes both the National Security Council administration as well as the congressional committees of jurisdiction. So, we'll see, how, what steps are taken. But I can tell you, yes, it was a mistake, shouldn't have happened. And, we need to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Last question, and I guess it's another separations of powers question. We've seen the Trump administration push back pretty hard on our judiciary that has been, issuing some injunctions, and understanding the frustration sometimes where, a single judge issues a national injunction and enjoins a policy across the country. And I understand that, but we've had some talk about impeaching James, district or federal judge James Boasberg, who North Dakotans should be familiar with. He's presided over the bulk of the litigation over the pipeline. But, calling for him to be impeached. Now, obviously, that would be something that would come through Congress. Would you be in support of impeaching James Boasberg if that legislation appeared before you?
Well, look, as you said, we have a lot of experience with Boasberg, and obviously still, you've got the Dakota Access Pipeline that's been operating safely now for, well over 5 years. And he's still held it up with additional studies and not made rulings. And even going back before that, Rob, we've been sued. The state of North Dakota, going back to when I first got elected governor back in 2001, Gail Norton, Secretary of Interior, signed the finding of no significant impact on NAS, the Northwest Area Water System, which, as you know, is very important up to Minot, up in that area where you live, and all of the northern part of North Dakota there. And we got held up for 20 years by a federal district court and judge in Washington, D.C., on a water system that we need. Got held up for 20 years as she talked about the mountain ranges in North Dakota, and we ultimately had to build a $100,000 water treatment plant to treat the water we take out of Lake Sakakawea to send up to Minot to run it through another water treatment plant to use it. It's just ludicrous. 20 years and all that expense because they venue shopped and got a judge in Washington, D.C. So the real approach is we need to look at, okay, what about venue shopping, or as they say, judge shopping? Should people be able to do that? Because if that case had been sued in federal district court in North Dakota, the outcome would have been a lot different, right? And so I think there are things we can do. I think if you get into impeaching judges, that kind of thing, I think that's very concerning because, think how it goes. You can have a conservative judge that's doing a good job, and then maybe, if Democrats are in power, they would go after that person. So I think the real way to approach this is we need to think very carefully about venue shopping. And then the other thing is for a federal district court judge, they can decide whether their decision applies only to the parties in front of them, or they can decide whether it applies nationally. Well, I think we have to really think hard about that and look at that. So I think those are the areas that we should be looking at, the venue shopping issue, and then should a federal district judge be able to apply something nationally? I think there needs to be some limits on that. And then we always have to remember that with any of these judges, state or federal or the Supreme Court, they have that statue out there with the scales and the woman with the blindfold on saying, hey, justice needs to be blind and fair to everybody. So we need to approach these things very thoughtfully and carefully and come up with good solutions to some of these challenges. Final point I'll make here is, as you know, I have always appointed conservative jurists who will uphold the Constitution. They're the Article 3 authority. That is vitally important to our country. They should not legislate from the bench. That is the role of Congress, Article 1. It's the role of the president to implement. It is the role of Article 3, the judges and justices to adjudicate impartially and fairly, not to legislate from the bench.
Senator, one last question. First of all, I really appreciate you coming on and answering these questions. I mean, there's just so much going on in the country. And it sort of reminds me of 2009 when folks were calling on the congressional delegation to do town halls in person. You've obviously seen the press calling on you to do town halls. Do you have any plans to do any town halls in the state?
I do public meetings all over the state, and people can come. I mean, everybody's got their own style in terms of that town hall, but these are public meetings, and I've always done many of them all over the state, and I'll continue to do them. I also come on and talk to guys like you. I answer questions to the press, to the radio. People can come in and see me. I have meetings. I work pretty hard on staying connected with North Dakotans, and I respect them, and it's an honor and a privilege to serve them.
I will say that that's true, by the way. If you go to the senator's website, you can see his upcoming events. And maybe that's the one thing is it's maybe it's not always clear that they're open to the public, but they are. If you're meeting with beef producers or something, usually that's, so if you want to come and sit and listen, you can do that. So that is very true. Senator, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, good to visit with you. Appreciate it.
Hey friends, we've got a new way for you to participate in the show. You can now call us or text us with your questions, comments, or anything you want us to discuss on Plain Talk. Just give us a call or shoot us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. It's super easy. Leave your message, tell us your name and where you're from, and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
Welcome back. Just finished up our interviews with Senator Hoeven. What he said about the town halls was true. Everybody's got their own style, and that is one thing. I empathize with their desire not to, walk into a meat grinder. I don't think it helps anybody. Like it makes great views for YouTube videos or Facebook videos or whatever. But it's not conducive to answering questions. I mean, I want a quiet room where people can stand up, ask pertinent questions. And it's not up to me what's pertinent or not. Things that are pertinent to them. But just ask questions and then sit down and listen to the answer and let the next person go. That is informative. That is helpful. I'll grant it's not as entertaining. But hey, I'm going to get one of those red hats that say make politics boring again, because
so
I think that would be better for our public.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, personally, I asked the question because I know a lot of people are asking that question. I'm not sure how beneficial having an elected official show up at a room and have a bunch of people scream at him. I mean, even the way I think we approached this interview, we asked him questions, right? We didn't like say you're wrong or whatever. We asked him questions, and they weren't easy questions, and he answered them. Not necessarily as clear as I would like them to be, but he answered the questions.
I think you and I, that's our interview style, is I don't want to have a debate with the person. Right. I want to ask them questions, and we could talk about their answers after the fact. We have this little segment at the end. You and I talk about how we feel about what they said. I could certainly, write about it, and often do, referencing the interviews that we do on this podcast. But I think that's the productive way of doing it. So some of his answers about, it's just hard. Like it's the way we just sort of write off the chaos that Trump sows. I mean, the damage that we're doing to our relationship with Canada, the idea that that's just a negotiating tactic and eventually they're going to come to the table and we're going to strike a deal and everything will be hunky-dory again. Sometimes you burn bridges.
Yeah. And I don't know.
We're burning a lot of bridges right now.
Yeah, and I don't know how you put a good spin. I mean, I understand they're saying, well, we're just, trying to make things even and fair and whatever. I was going to ask him about, I heard a report last night that we slapped a 10% tariff on, I can't remember the name. It's an island that is only inhabited by penguins. There's no humans that actually live on that. Like, that makes me nervous that that's the quality of the work that's being done on these things. I mean, it reminds you of the Signal chat. I mean, it's crazy that the incompetence of the administration.
Well, if it's about getting better deals, we slapped some heavy tariffs on some countries that we have some of the most free trade with that you could possibly imagine, like very beneficial trade deals to our interests. And I don't think you can discount. I mean, it's one thing to say, yeah, it's going to be rough for a while. Boy, if you're an American that's living on the edge, that's living paycheck to paycheck, and maybe you're not putting a lot away in savings, and all of a sudden, grocery probably it's weird. Like President Trump won, or kind of the it's simplistic, but like the price of eggs thing,
Right.
like you put on that, and now we're implementing policies that are going to make everything more expensive. And,
Yeah,
and also, I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's now Trump's inflation. It's now Trump's market. I mean, if you're planning on retiring a year from now, you're no longer retiring a year from now.
Yeah, that's a tough thing for people. And also, like the separations of powers stuff. I thought he made a good point about judges. Like he's not going to support an impeachment, but Congress should look at some reform. I agree with that.
Yeah.
I think sometimes judges go too far. And by the way, that is an explicit part of Congress's Article 1 authority, that they can set the jurisdiction of the courts. That's explicit in the Constitution. They can do that. We can pass that reform. But the idea that we're just going to impeach a judge because the judge issued a ruling that Trump doesn't like, that's a dangerous thing. And I was glad to hear the senator say he wouldn't support that.
Yeah, I also think the idea of judge shopping is something that happens all over this country, which I don't like. A lot of conservatives are coming to North Dakota these days to get to this federal judge, Dan Traynor here in Bismarck, in order to hear their cases. So it happens on both sides. I don't think it's right that you're just looking for the right judge. But, again, I'm appreciative of Hoeven coming in and answering the questions. I just think on this tariff thing, on the Doge cuts, it's sort of a little bit of hear no evil, see no evil, like just sort of put your head down and just cross your fingers that everything's going to be okay. But in the meantime, there's a lot of people who are very uncomfortable and already hurting because of these decisions. And I don't think Senator Hoeven and the majorities in the Senate and the Congress are going to be able to get away with this much longer without doing something to sort of stop the pain.
Senator Hoeven's defense of executive orders in that it was a little frustrating too, because it was like he went to the but Biden argument. And I just that was my whole point. Like if President Biden's executive orders are wrong, why are Trump's right? Is it just whether, and the thing is, a lot of executive orders, like the policy outcome, I'm probably okay, especially as related to like the energy industry and things like that. I'm probably hunky-dory with them, right? I with the policy outcome. Right. My problem is that we're upset if we implement our policy through executive order, then the next president could just wipe it out. And his overall point about Congress has got to legislate and write these things and write clear laws in statute that we expect the executive branch, no matter who's in charge, to follow. That's correct. But quit support. Like part of the way we get there is quit supporting unconstitutional executive orders just because you like them.
Yeah. So it's been a while since I've quoted my mom on the podcast, but Alice Oben used to tell me 2 wrongs don't make a right. And the whole time he was saying, but Biden, and going through the whole Biden list, I was thinking the same thing. Well, if we didn't like it when somebody who disagreed with you did this, why do we like it now? Like we're again, kind of like when we talked to Drew Ruby about the hypocrisy of local control. It's the exact same thing, right? I like if the judges are deciding with me. I like executive orders if they're the same thing as I agree with. But at some point, the institutions matter. And if we're going to continue as the country we are, we got to respect some of these institutions.
Yeah. And I think we need more of people like speaking out against this stuff, like speaking out against their own interest. Like, even though I agree with this was done wrong and we've got to do it the right way. And there's just not a lot of willingness to do that right now.
And Rob, I still can't, going back to tariffs really quick, I still can't wrap my head around the Republican position doing a full 180 so quickly. I mean, it feels like the only person who's staying consistent, and I hate to say this, is Rand Paul. And Rand Paul's on the floor saying these tariffs are a bad idea. Tariffs have always been a bad idea. That used to be George W. Bush's position and Ronald Reagan's position and so many others.
I would argue that it still is George W. Bush's position.
Yeah, true.
He's not in office anymore. So that is very frustrating. And the whole "you did it too" thing. I've said there's a Latin motto, "tu coke." It's a logical fallacy. It means basically you did it too. we could replace, e pluribus unum with tu coke as our national motto, because everybody's like, well, I'm going to justify the amount of times, like according to MAGA supporters, Joe Biden was the worst president we've ever had. But the amount of time they spend justifying things that Donald Trump does because Joe Biden did them is mind-boggling. Like,
use their validation.
If you thought Joe Biden was, and I thought Joe Biden was a terrible president. I don't think he was a good president at all. I didn't like a lot of the things he's done, but I'm not going to turn around and say wow, well, it's okay if Trump does it because Biden did it. Well, if you think Biden's a terrible president, that's a terrible argument. That's a terrible justification.
Yeah, and I also didn't like the sort of what should farmers and ranchers be thinking. And he said, well, when we put this big tariff on China, we ended up cutting checks to all the farmers and ranchers around the state, so they ended up being okay. What? What?
In the cut, we just got done talking about Doge, and we got to do all this stuff because we've got a $35 trillion national debt, or 36 trillion, whatever it is now. And I accept that as an argument, but then you can't turn around and say, but we got to prop up Trump's trade war by bailing out the people who are hurt by it with money that we don't have, that we're trying to save by gutting the CDC and putting the people who deal with domestic violence situations, casting them into a pit of uncertainty about their funding. There's a better way to do this.
Right. And Rob, I think you and I both want this to land in a good place. I hope this tariff thing somehow works out. I can't see the path. I hope that they figure out these Doge cuts. I also, I'm a little frustrated. Both Fedorchak and Hoeven sort of made reference to federal employees not coming to work. Everywhere in the country, people have implemented work from home policies. So just because you're not in the office doesn't mean you're not working. Let's sell the buildings.
As I'm sitting here recording this podcast in my home office, I feel a little attacked. The forum lets me work from home. I think it works swimmingly. And I understand that's not maybe the case for every employee or every business. I get it. But let's just not make they're casting work from home people as inherently lazy or something. It's just not true. I think it's
and I think if people aren't coming to work because they're working from home and there's empty buildings, let's get rid of the buildings. Right? I mean, there's a place for us to land here without saying federal employees are lazy if they're working from home.
Yeah, I agree with you. All right, we need to wrap it up. By the way, we have another live recording of Plain Talk coming up. It's going to be in Bismarck. It's going to be in downtown Bismarck at the Peacock Alley. Again, they were such wonderful hosts. Great food, great atmosphere, great setup. We just had an absolute blast. Peacock Alley wanted us back. We want to go back. So that's going to be a lot of fun. That's coming up Wednesday, April 23rd. We'll have more details down the road about that. Once again, follow us on all the various social media things, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, if it's still around. I don't know.
I had somebody say to me the other day that I'm TikTok famous because every time they turn on TikTok, your face and my face are on their TikTok. So I'm not on the TikToks to know if we're TikTok famous, but it sounds like we are.
I started a TikTok account just so that I could follow the Plain Talk account and share it. I shared Plain Talk's post to all the people who don't follow me.
Everybody wants to turn on TikTok and see our faces. That's what the kids get TikTok for.
Right, to look at middle-aged man talk boring about politics.
Middle-aged. I mean, you're much younger than me, as we've established on the last 2 episodes.
That's absolutely true. I am much younger, years younger.
You can see it in the beard.
Somebody did comment on TikTok asking well, do you post your content which I really liked it, but they asked if we post our content anywhere else, if TikTok shuts down, and it said, yeah, we post all the same videos on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, etc. All right, that's it. We're going to put a pin in it there. Thank you so much for listening, as always, and we'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host, Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening. We're at that point in the legislative session where everything gets super weird.